Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're at in the world. And hello, everyone, and welcome to another Altaro sponsored webinar. This one being on Office 365 versus Microsoft 365, and which one is the perfect platform for you. My name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist here at Altaro Software, and really excited to share the content with you today. We've got a great speaker on the line here, good buddy of mine, Paul Schnackenburg. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. So, hey, I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about Office 365 and Microsoft 365 today. It's kind of one of those technologies that's really blowing up in the last, I've kind of lost track of how long it's even been out there. I remember when it was used, the acronym was BPAWS kind of a long time ago, but definitely the platform's seen a lot of improvements and has kind of taken the world by storm here the last couple of years, especially. So, a lot of great content to talk about, and I think what we'll do is we'll get started with our agenda for the day. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we've got a lot to talk about today, so we're gonna try and get right to it here fairly quickly. So we're gonna do some introductions of Altaro, myself, and Paul, the speaker. We'll talk about each platform specifically. We'll get into managing and supporting Office 365, migration, Azure Active Directory, key apps, security, which is always a popular topic, especially with how things are in the IT landscape today. And we'll get to finally that question of how to choose which one is best for your organization. And then finally we'll do some wrap up and Q&A at the end. Now, one thing about the Q&A, you've got the questions form there in GoToWebinar. Feel free to use that as we go throughout the content today. If we've got a chance to talk and organically answer any of the questions as we go through the content, by all means, we're gonna go ahead and do that. We'd like to try and answer questions as we, as we're talking about content pertinent to the question. But if for some reason we can't, we answer as many questions at the end of the webinar as we can. And even then, if we don't get to all the questions in the allotted time we have, we'll be sure to do something of a follow-up blog post or post those questions and their associated answers somewhere so that you can still get the answer to your question. So again, don't be afraid to use that questions form. We're happy to answer any and all questions. So with that, let's cut to some quick introductions. So first off, again, my name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist here at Altaro Software, also a Microsoft MVP and VMware vExpert. I'm just kind of acting as your host today. I'm just kind of quarterbacking. Paul is the one that's going to be, walking you through the bulk of the content. If you're interested in connecting with me, I am quite active on Twitter there. My apologies. You'll have to spell the last name. I need to make that a little bit easier for folks to remember. One of these days, I'll change it to Andy Sandwich because that's what they called me in elementary school. But I haven't gotten around to that yet. Additionally, we've got 3 blogs that you can take a look at, altaro.com/hyper-v/vmware/msp-dojo. One thing about Office 365 content on our platform, so even though it's a Hyper-V labeled blog, we do some stuff about Office 365 occasionally, especially on the MSP Dojo as well. So if you're an MSP and you're using Office 365, we do post some Office 365 related content on the MSP Dojo once in a while as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Paul to do his introduction.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. And I'll echo what Andy said and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm coming to you from Australia, so it's fairly late evening here. I've been in IT for as long as I can remember, basically. I started with 286 computers for the old people in the audience who will know what that is. That was a long time ago. I don't tweet a lot, but I am available there on Twitter. You got my blog there, you can follow me, and my business website as well. And I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, etc. I'm originally from Sweden, but I have been living in Australia for over 20 years. Back to you, Andy.
Thank you, sir. So real quick word about today's sponsor, again, Altaro Software, the company I work for. So we're a fast growing developer of some pretty fantastic, awesome, super easy to use backup software that's designed for MSPs, IT resellers, and IT departments. That solution is trusted by 50,000 plus customers worldwide, 10,000 plus partners, and 2,000 plus MSPs. So that product, the flagship product, is Altaro VM Backup, which does backup for Hyper-V and VMware-based workloads. We also have a Altaro Office 365 backup application, which I have a really short, like 2-minute demo for you a little bit later today. If you're interested in either of those products, the URLs are right there. And also, if you're an MSP interested in our MSP program, go to altaro.com/MSP for more information. So with that, I think we're through the boilerplate stuff, and we can start getting to what you're here to listen about today. So the first thing I wanted to do before I hand things over to Paul is we've got a little bit of a poll to start with. I want to see, of our attendees, who is using Office 365 today and who is using Microsoft 365. Now, I don't know about you, Paul, but I'm pretty sure I know which way the wind is going to blow on this one. I'm guessing, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing most people are on the Office 365 side. Would that be your prediction as well?
Definitely.
Gotcha. So we'll give folks a second or two here to fill that out. And one thing that we use these polls for, and I'll probably mention this again later, is we use these polls to determine content. If a lot of people are using, if a lot more people are using Microsoft 365 than than we expected, we'll start doing some more content focused around Microsoft 365 content areas. So yep, okay, so there we go. That's what it looks like. So I've got 68% using Office 365, 9% using Microsoft 365, 18% who are currently deciding which to choose, which this is a perfect webinar for the folks that fall into that category. So I'm happy you're here today. And we got 5% with no immediate plans to use either. So it must just be kind of getting the lay of the land and seeing where we're at. So definitely good. Appreciate your input on that, everyone. And with that, I will hand things over to Paul, and he'll take us through the bulk of the content. Take it away, sir.
Thanks very much. It's interesting that nearly 20% is looking for which one to choose. So I think this is a good webinar. All right, so I've been using Office 365 and selling it to clients ever since it was BPOS, which was a terrible name, and Office 365 is a better one, except for every leap year when apparently it's not available on the 366th day of the year on the 29th of February, because I'm pretty sure that's what the 365 comes from. Anyway, before we move to the next slide, I always, when I was looking at these prepared slides here, I was always looking at this guy. He looks really happy, and he looks like something is really good going on, except his screen is black, so there's nothing on the screen. So I'm not sure exactly what he's so happy about, but whatever. We will continue from here. So now, quite a few of you said, of course, that you're using Office 365. So some of what we cover today will be very basic, right? Because I've got like 40 minutes to give you an overview of a gigantic platform with hundreds of things in it, and there's no way I can even cover any of this in depth. But I did want to give you sort of the overall introduction. So for those of you who are just looking at which to choose or not deciding at this stage, some of this introductory stuff here could be of interest, right? So Office 365, and in true Microsoft fashion, of course, they've confused everybody by having several different things called Office. So Office 365 is a bunch of cloud services. It is also, can be, depending on which plan you're on, it can also be Word and Excel and PowerPoint, etc., installed on your machine, which is called Office Pro Plus. It can also be Word and Excel, etc., running in a browser, which is called Office Online. Except I saw that Microsoft recently decided they were going to call that Office, which is not going to be confusing at all. And then there's two different strands here. So you have the business side, which is business essentials, etc. That tops out at 300 users. And then you have the enterprise SKUs, the E1, E3, and E5. So that's sort of like a whole high-level overview of Office 365. And I'm going to jump out here for a sec and into here. So these pages are the links on those slides there, and that take you to this one here, for instance, where we can compare the business premium, the business essentials, right? So you see that the business essentials, for instance, does not include Office on your desktop. It just includes the browser-based ones, right? And then you can see through all these different details here. For the E1, E3, and E5, here you can see the different commitments there, what's included at each of these levels. If you just want the Pro Plus, the actual Office installation on your machine, but you don't want Exchange and SharePoint and Teams, you can get just the Office 365 Pro Plus one. These are the plan options that talk about all the different intricate details of what's included. And then this is the service description. And this is the one where your consultant and your Office 365 experts will go in and check exactly what's included at each entitlement level. And it all depends, of course, on what you need for your business. And you can, of course, mix and match your different levels, right? So you don't have to buy the highest, say, E5 for everybody. Maybe a few users get E5, some get E3, maybe some get E1, etc., right? So you can mix and match to your heart's content. So we jump back in here, and so that's Office 365. Now Microsoft 365 takes the Office 365 inclusions and then adds additional services on the side, right? So you get Office 365 plus Azure Active Directory Premium, which gives you a whole bunch of security features. You get Intune for device management, and you get Windows 10 Enterprise for your devices. And each licensed user gets up to 5 installations of that. And it also comes in the Microsoft 365 business, again, tops out at 300 users, but here it's very simple. There is only one. There isn't Essentials and Plus or whatever. There's only Microsoft 365 Business. And then on the enterprise side or the bigger business side, you have F1 for frontline workers, and then you have E3 and E5. And again, I'm going to jump out very briefly here to have a look at these. So you've got the Microsoft 365 for business here. You can see your plans and pricing for that one, which takes me to Office. There's your Microsoft 365 business over here, and you can see exactly what's included there, right? And as you can see, that's more than in the Office side. And then the same thing here, you've got your 3 plans for the enterprise side. And enterprise, of course, here does not mean that you need to be an enterprise, right? You could have 5 lawyers in a small office that needs the security features of Microsoft 365 E5, right? And they could use that. So you don't need to be a big business to use the enterprise SKUs.
Hey, Paul, really quick while you're going on to the next slide. I think one question that often comes up when I'm talking with folks is the F1 SKU. What is Microsoft's definition of a frontline worker? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good, it's a great question, and thank you for pointing that out. So the way Microsoft sees it is this is a user who does not spend their day in front of a computer, right? This is not an information worker, an office worker who has their own laptop, but it's a factory worker. It is a hospitality worker in a restaurant, or a nurse in a hospital or something. So these are users that spend their days doing other stuff, but then at times need to access emails and documents and other things, and probably from a shared computer, right? They don't have their own computer, but maybe they have shared computers that several different people have access to. That's how Microsoft sees a frontline worker, and that's where these SKUs are designed for.
Sounds good. Thanks for the clarification. I'll let you carry on now.
Thanks, and thank you for catching that one. Right. So, and we're going to go in the right direction to get to here. Okay, so once you have, say, set up your trials, you can get a 30-day trial of either Office or Microsoft 365. You then need to manage it, and most people's initial, experience of Office 365 will be the Office portal, so office.com or portal.office.com. And once you get a little bit more into it and you need to do some automation, you have lots of users, you're going to end up in PowerShell, right? And where you can we've got a PowerShell core here, but you can work away at the command line to script and automate stuff. So let's have a very brief look at those portals and those interfaces. So, oh, excuse me. This is what greets a user when they log in here. I can see that my appointment with you guys is 16 minutes overdue up here. So I'm going to dismiss that. So this is my business's Office 365 page. I get all of these icons. I can go straight into the web-based versions of these applications here. Some of these obviously don't have anything else but a web-based application. So things like Planner, or for instance, or Stream, they are only on the web, whereas Word here would take me to the web-based version, right? I can see my documents that I've been working on recently. That's all here. So this is what an ordinary user would see. Now, because I'm an administrator, I also get this icon for the administration, which takes me to this place. So this is the admin center, where I can work with users, I can work with groups, I can set up security roles, I can configure settings, I can do the setup of my email domains, etc. I can look at the health of Office 365, so I can see, are there any problems here? And you can see this is a live demo, so I have no idea what I'm going to get in here. We can see we have one incident here. I can't send email in RTF format with embedded images. There you go. It's a service degradation that started 5 days ago. Come on, Microsoft, get onto it, fix it. For all of those people who
5 days is quite a bit there.
Sorry, Andy?
I was going to say 5 days is quite a bit there.
Well, I think this is not exactly a super high priority. I think most people don't probably email in RTF that often nowadays. So, but that's an example of the sort of thing you can see. Further down here, we have all our admin centers. So this is where I would go in and administer my Exchange implementation, or Teams, and other admin centers are available here as well. So those are the sort of things that I would get to. Now, if you want to do some scripting, you're going to head over to PowerShell, and I have already connected here. So you would do a connect Azure AD. I'm not going to let you guys suffer through this, but basically you log in here. I have MFA turned on, so that's multi-factor authentication. So once I put my username and password in, I'm going to have to also approve a prompt on my phone so that I can then get to this point where I'm logged in. And once I'm in, once I'm in, I can then run other commandlets in here to script or do other administration as needs be. So we will jump back here. So that's the interfaces, and now we go to troubleshooting and supporting. So as you can imagine, as I said, we got 40 minutes, so it's not like I have time to go into the detail on any of these administration things. But as you guys shoot questions into the to the questions pane, we can answer those either at the end or as we go. So here's some troubleshooting tools that are sort of part of your basic tool belt when you become an Office 365 administrator. And I suppose my biggest, from my experience talking to a lot of administrators and my own experience and teaching Office 365 for quite some time, is that if you are new to Office 365 and its administration, you probably don't have a lot to worry about. There's plenty of content out there and you can just get used to it. If, however, you come from the on-premises world, so let's say a few years ago you were the Exchange administrator, or you were the SharePoint administrator, or you were the IT guy in a smaller business, right? It's important to drop your baggage. We all have baggage, we all have biases that we gather as we you know, grow in our careers in IT, and one of those is to see things the same. So some people that I talk to say, oh, Office 365 is just hosted Exchange, it's just hosted SharePoint, and nothing could be further from the truth. If you say 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago, that was definitely true. It was Microsoft figuring out how to even run Exchange at scale and service, you know, hundreds of thousands of users worldwide. But that's a long time ago. And Office 365 is so much more than just those building blocks of Exchange and SharePoint in the cloud. There's so many other things there. So one of the things that changes, of course, is the support experience. So when you have a problem, you can't control the whole experience, right? When you have a problem on premises, you can do everything you need to do to fix that problem up. But when you're in the cloud, you have to work together with their experience and their support team, because if the problem is somewhere in their systems, you're going to have to talk to them. And that's called a service request. Before you get to a service request, though, you probably want to use some self-service tools to see if it's a basic thing that you can sort of fix yourself without having to actually contact Microsoft support. And finally, before we move off this slide, customer lockbox is if you have the higher SKUs, the Office 365 E5 or the Microsoft 365 E5, you can involve yourself in the support process. So if the support engineer, once you've opened a service request, needs to access a server that has your business data on it, they will have to go through a process like all support cases where they need to access a server always goes through this, the lockbox system in Microsoft's internal system, where they have to apply for access and they get limited access to that server for a limited amount of time to do whatever support they need to do there. But with customer lockbox, you also get to approve that access, right? So if that's something you need from a regulation point of view, you can do that. So let's have a quick look at one of these troubleshooting tools, which is the Remote Connectivity Analyzer. So if we jump out here to here, we have this one here. Now this one is not Office 365 specific. As you can see here, you can use it for Exchange Server, you can use it for Skype for Business and Link Server on premises, and then we have our Office 365 tests here. So I'll make this a little bit bigger for those of you on the webcast here. And this one now talks about, so here is where I can pick my different tests, right? So for instance, if you have a user who's got trouble connecting with Outlook, you can put some details in here, pick one of these tests here, and you can put in the details, and then it will give you a very detailed report on how that test went and whether it failed or succeeded and where it failed, if it failed along the way, right? Or let's say that a new user's Outlook refuses to find your Office 365. Well, you can do the Outlook auto discover here and see what is the problem here. You can test in your internet, email, etc., and Exchange Active Sync if you're using older phones and those sorts of things. If you are accessing Office 365 email today, you should definitely be using Outlook, the app for iOS and Android, and get away from Active Sync if you can. Anyway, so that's that one there. Now this one here is the SARA, or Support and Recovery Assistant. This is a client tool that you run on the end user machine. So this is very handy when there is a specific problem with software on the end user's machine. And it does all these sorts of troubleshooting here. It's fairly automated, and you know, if this can't find the problem and the connectivity assistant can't find the problem, then it's time to open a service request with Microsoft and have a chat to them. So now migrating to Office 365. So of course, one of the strengths and why Office 365 based on pure numbers, as much as either company releases them compared to Google's G Suite, is the opportunity to migrate from what you have into a very similar environment. So if you have Exchange today and you want to migrate to the cloud, well, Microsoft's Office 365 is happy to take that migration because, of course, from that point of view, it's Exchange running in the cloud. Same thing for SharePoint, etc. So we're going to talk very briefly on how you get from on-premises to the cloud if you have environments today. So if you have a smaller amount of mailboxes, say 100, 150 at the most, and you can do this over a weekend where business will not have access to email, you can do what's called a cutover migration. It's simplest in the sense, and obviously 100 to 150 depends on the size of your mailboxes and your internet bandwidth connectivity. But the general idea here is you simply move everybody's mail to Exchange Online over the weekend, point everybody there, and their outlooks are just going to keep working from that point on with their mailboxes stored in the cloud instead of on premises. Now, if you are on older unsupported versions of Exchange 03 and 07, you got to do a staged migration, and there's documentation to help you with that. Then we have some hybrids. So there is 3 different versions of this, and they all differ slightly in what they support. The full hybrid, or the full hybrid migration, is where you have lots of mailboxes. You want to take your time over this, as in month and month, and you want full interoperability. And this literally means that you can have a user with a mailbox on premises and a user with a mailbox in the cloud, and they can share calendar data. They can, of course, email each other back and forth, and it gives you that full hybrid. And that's the only one that also allows you to offboard. So you can move somebody's mailbox to the cloud, then decide that that wasn't what you wanted, and you can move their mailbox back to your on-premises Exchange service. If you have a smaller environment, you might opt for the PST-based migration, or you have lots of data in people's mailboxes, but not very good bandwidth connectivity. You can basically send a bunch of PST files to Microsoft, either if you do have the bandwidth over a internet connection, or you can ship disks to Microsoft, and they will literally copy them from the disks into their servers. If you're on a third-party system, you might do an IMAP migration. So if you're on Lotus Notes or Domino or one of those systems, you can do an IMAP migration. And then, of course, all the other squares except for the last one here are all Microsoft-supported ways of getting to the cloud. There's also a bunch of third-party tools. So if you've got some sort of funky setup, you could definitely look at a third-party tool, which costs money but makes it more easy.
People still use Lotus Notes?
I have no idea. I've got an old acquaintance of mine who is a developer, and he still talks fondly of it and still develops for it. So there's got to be somebody paying for his time. So clearly there must be people around that does it.
Oh yeah, yep. I still run into it once in a while, but yeah. So, hey, I have a question pop up in the chat here, specifically about migrating from Exchange 2007 to Office 365. They're just kind of looking for some migration documentation, basically. Basically, I'm guessing a how-to on how to do it. I don't know if you have any resources or, some place that you can point them to get that information.
Well, what a leading question. It so happens that we have an ebook, and in said ebook that is coming out from Altaro, and in said ebook we do have a whole chapter on migrating to Office 365, and in that there is some paragraphs there about the staged migration with a whole bunch of links to the official documentation on the staged migration. So basically it's docs.microsoft.com, DOCS for documents. And you can do a search from there, but if you hang on, you get the this free ebook, and in that free ebook I've got all the links that you might want. I hope. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly I covered staged migration.
Sounds good. Thanks, Paul.
Any other questions?
I think that's it for now.
Excellent. All right, so Azure Active Directory, still the happy guy with a black screen. And we're moving on to Azure Active Directory. Now, as I was saying to Andy before we started the presentation on the broadcast, we were talking about this, and there are users of Office 365 that don't even think about the fact that they have Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is the underlying directory underneath Office 365, just like in your on-premises environment. If you have Exchange Server, for instance, Active Directory is your directory with users and groups and stuff that underlies Exchange, right? Those things are not stored in Exchange. So Azure Active Directory, or AAD, is not Active Directory. There's lots of technical differences here, but from the point of view of this conversation today, the point is that you can link the two together. So if you have Active Directory today, you have hundreds or thousands or even more users on premises, and you don't want to recreate all those users in the cloud and then have 2 places to manage user accounts, etc. What you can do is you can link the 2 of them together. The tool is called AAD Connect. It is free. And it is the only supported tool. If you've been around this game for a while, there were others such as DirSync and those sorts of tools around the earlier years, they are no longer supported. AAD Connect is the way to go. Now, the other option or the other thing you have to think about here is, okay, so I'm going to synchronize user accounts from Active Directory to the cloud, and that's a one-way synchronization, and the master is always on premises. So when you hire a new person, you still create their account on premises just like you always have. It then gets synced to the cloud, you assign a license to that user, and they can now start using Office 365. Now, the next question is, okay, what are we going to do with the passwords? So one option is the password hash synchronization. So this synchronizes a hash, and in case you don't know what that is, go to Wikipedia, but basically it does a mathematical operation on a chunk of text, in this case a password, produces a string, and that string is what we can then compare. And if the hash in the cloud matches the hash on the premises, the password that has to have been the same password, right? Now, the hashing algorithm used in Active Directory are a lot weaker because they're a lot older than the ones used in the cloud, but there might be some people that are a little bit iffy about storing a hash of a password in Microsoft's cloud. I don't think you should be. I think they're very trustworthy. But if that's an issue for you, you can use pass-through authentication instead. It's a fairly new model, been around for maybe a year. You put a bunch of little agents on premises, either on domain controllers or on member servers. A person logs into office.com, and Office 365 says, well, I can see your username, but I do not have your password, or I don't have the hash of your password, so I'm going to ask your domain controller whether you have the right password. And it's going to talk to that agent or those agents on premises and let you in. And that is one way of not storing your passwords in the cloud. With both of those two, you get seamless single sign-on, which means that when a user logs into Active Directory on their Windows computer in the morning, when they then go to office.com, they are not prompted for username and password. They're seamlessly single signed on there. And that's a nice, another nifty, nice little feature to turn on. And again, it's not a problem if it should fail for some reason, because it just falls back to people having to log into office.com as well. If you want to, you could use Active Directory Federation services, a bit more of a setup. Again, I cover this in the book, but you don't want to go into details on that unless you already have ADFS set up. You should turn on multi-factor authentication for security. Gives you a second factor by having an app on your phone that you have to, authenticate the request with. And then of course we can publish applications. So if you remember that slide or the screen where I showed you all the Word, Excel, etc. in my web-based interface, you can have all sorts of other applications there. So way over 3,000 other cloud services, third-party ones, and even on-premises applications can show up in that one interface for your users to click on. With Microsoft 365 E3, you get AAD Premium, and with E5, you get Premium P2. And with Premium P1, you get some nice security features, such as the ability to ban bad passwords. That's the single best thing you can do to improve security. Users can self-service reset their passwords when they forget them, and you get conditional access where you can control access to specific applications at specific times from specific locations for specific user accounts being members of specific groups, and you can fine-tune all that access very neatly for security. With Premium P2, you get the all-out security features such as user risk level and sign-in risk level, where Microsoft tracks a score of every user, how risky they are, and then you can use conditional access to build policies around a risky user is not allowed to log into a particular application after hours or that sort of thing. And then you have privileged identity management, PIM, which allows you to make users so privileged users, as in global administrators, Exchange administrators, SharePoint administrators, and so forth, they are just ordinary users, and then they have to ask, similar to that lockbox thing that I mentioned a while ago, they have to ask to be elevated when they need to do administrative stuff. Again, lowers your risk profile.
Hey Paul, we're getting some good questions on the Azure AD stuff here in the
Excellent.
chat,
Shoot.
and I figure what we can do is we can cover one or two of the quick ones, and then there's one that's a little bit more involved. We'll talk about in the Q&A section. But um, one of them is, can I have group policies in Azure AD? Are they the same like on-premises policies? I figured you could talk to that really quick, and then I got another one for you before we move on.
Great question. So Azure Active Directory is not Active Directory. We do not have group policies, and it doesn't work the same in that way. The equivalent of group policies in the cloud really is a mobile device management such as Intune, where you can use policies or MDM policies, including security policies, and push those out. So that's the short answer to that one. Second one?
Sounds good. The second one is centers around multi-factor authentication and whether or not it can be enabled on a user per user basis. Is it kind of whole hog all the users in an organization, or you can choose specific users to enable it for?
Absolutely. So you can definitely choose specific users. The initial recommendation, of course, is all your administrators should definitely be using it, right? That's all my clients that are on Office 365. They do not have a choice. If they want to be administrators, they have to have MFA turned on. That's just, and it's free, no matter what SKU you're on, different versions of Office 365. Administrators always get MFA for free. You turn that on because it's otherwise you're just asking for trouble.
Right.
End users, you can have a pilot group, sections of the business that you enable MFA for, but you definitely want to do some training with them because otherwise they're going to be upset with you.
Right. Sounds good. Thanks, Paul.
So this is the Azure Active Directory Admin Center, where I, as an administrator, can go in and work with Azure Active Directory individually. Again, we don't have time to go in here in detail, of course, but I did want to show you very briefly the enterprise applications. So this is where I can publish an application that shows up on that main page, right? And if I click here on an application, we can see that I got 3,240 applications to choose from. And you can see some that you probably know the name of, right? So Box and DocuSign, etc., etc. And if you publish them this way, you have control as an administrator of your end users' access to these things. To the point, for instance, I think, oh no, Twitter isn't here anymore, they've moved it out. But Twitter is obviously one of the ones that is in here. You've got users who tweet on behalf of the company, but you don't want them to have the username and password for your corporate Twitter account. You can publish it here. They will never know the username and password, but they can log in and tweet until, if they leave the company, you can disable their account and they can no longer tweet on behalf of the company. So that's an example of what you could use this for. So let's jump back and talk about Exchange, etc. So we talked about hybrid approach there, where you can have Exchange on-prem linked up to your Exchange in the cloud. Very briefly, native data protection means that Microsoft is going to make very sure that they don't lose your mailbox data. They're going to have 3 copies in up-to-date copies. They also have a lagged copy if you should ever end up with some sort of data corruption. And that way, they're never going to lose your stuff. However, if you have a requirement to be able to go back in time and say, well, this is what the mailbox looked like 3 weeks ago, that is not part of what Office 365 offers. And if you need that for regulatory reasons or peace of mind, you definitely need to look at a third-party backup solution, such as the one that Altaro offers. You definitely want to look at your auto discover, because these are the records in DNS that makes people automatically be able to just put in a username, and then their Outlook or their Outlook on iOS and Android finds their Exchange in the cloud. For some SKUs, you have an archive mailbox, which is ultimately endless in size. You can put as much as you want in there. You can have shared mailboxes that do not use a license. So this is appropriate for things like an info at or a support at, where you have several different people accessing that same mailbox and they answer different requests at different times. Distribution lists we can build in Exchange Online just like we can on-prem, but you probably want to look at the new Office 365 groups instead. I did have the links in here for the Altaro solutions, but I think Andy might be coming back to this later on to demo those, so I'm going to move on. SharePoint Online is also the storage for OneDrive for Business. So every user, well, in most SKUs, but as a general rule, gets a terabyte of storage in the cloud where they can store their files, business files that they're working on. They are stored in SharePoint Online, but you don't really see that as an end user. Then we have the SharePoint itself, which is, as most people would know, a web-based collaboration platform. Comes in 2 versions. So modern is here. It's been here for a few years, and that's the one that flows nicely depending on if you're on a small screen or a big screen, and gives you a bunch of other features. So if you're getting started with the SharePoint Online, you definitely want to always use the modern approaches. If you have used it for a few years, you might have some sites that are in classic mode, and you can actually upgrade those to modern mode. Specifically, you want to look at external sharing. What is your end users allowed to share with people outside your organization? How can they do that sharing? What control do you have over that? So there's a number of external sharing settings that you would want to look at. There is also a SharePoint migration tool. So if you have on-premises file shares and or SharePoint sites, you can migrate those to SharePoint Online using the free SharePoint migration tool. Again, if you have a complex setup, you probably want to look at one of the third-party tools instead, but for your basic setups, the SharePoint migration tool will do the job. Okay, Office 365 groups and teams. So Office 365 groups is one of those building blocks that I mentioned before that is sort of part of how Office 365 does its thing. And you can have dynamic groups based on criteria in Active Directory. So for instance, everybody whose manager is John are going to end up in this group, or everybody whose department that they're working in is marketing is going to end up in this group, right? Which makes it easier to maintain group membership. Now, you might have heard, there might have been a little bit of noise on the internet over the last couple of years about this little application Microsoft called Teams. It's a direct competition to Slack, obviously, and it's doing really well. Teams is a really good solution. And it comes for all your platforms. It is the replacement for Skype for Business, which is going to be finally, so Skype for Business Online, right? Not the on-premises stuff, but the online stuff. It's going to be retired in 2 years, or nearly 2 years. There is a portal to manage Teams. There's channels inside of Teams. You have your tabs where you can add in third-party and other Microsoft applications. If you're in the right country, which is not Australia, you can fairly easily add PSTN calling. So you can use Teams as a phone client and called ordinary public switched telephone networks. And Teams will also translate text. So if you're happily doing an instant messaging to somebody in France and they're typing in French, you can ask the Teams client to translate that into English, and then you write in English and that gets translated into French for them. So a bit like the universal translator in Star Trek, although we're not quite there yet, but it's pretty cool, and it does 60 languages. Of course, as I mentioned, Office 365 is much more than just Exchange and SharePoint. So we got a bunch of other applications built into the platform, such as Planner, which is lightweight project management. We have Stream for videos, Kaizala, which is a bit like Teams, but for very low bandwidth scenarios, Power BI for managing your BI interfaces, as in business intelligence, Flow for doing automated logic things, Power Apps, Delve, Yammer, lots of different ones in here to look into. But I do want to get towards the end here, and we are not having a lot of time left. So I did want to cover the security bits. So once you move to the cloud, security is a shared responsibility. So there's a whole bunch of different tools that you need to deploy or apply to your environments so that you can increase the security of your end users so they can still be productive. So we have a bunch of advanced threat protection, such as Office 365 advanced threat protection, Azure advanced threat protection. We have things like sensitivity labels where you start labeling your data so you know what's sensitive and what's not. You can then add Azure information protection on top of those things and encrypt those documents automatically. You can send encrypted emails to other people, including people in email systems other than Office 365, so Gmail, etc. You can send them an encrypted email that nobody else except for the intended recipient can read. We can do data loss prevention, where you warn your users if they're putting sensitive information into an email. We can do Exchange Online protection for protection against spam and viruses. And then we have the Office 365 ATP, which does more advanced things such as track links in emails and takes attachments and checks them in a sandbox in a virtual machine before they're delivered to your end users. Gives you nice security. With Microsoft 365, you get a bunch more security features, right? So we get advanced threat analytics in your E3 level, and you get AATP in the E5 level. Both of these are essentially the same product. One is a cloud service and easier to deploy, which is the AATP. This is a fantastic tool, and I could spend a whole hour just talking about this. This is the best way to protect your Active Directory against identity-based threats, and there's lots of those. Cloud App Security is a CASB, or a Cloud App Security broker, which monitors what your users are doing in the cloud and lets you set policies. Another great product. Secure Score is an overall tool that allows you to see what security features have we got turned on in Office 365 and how is that improving our security. And you can then keep turning on more security features and see your score go up. And the single simplest way of improving the security of your Office 365 tenant is to block legacy authentication. These are the old protocols that are insecure, and these are the ones that the attackers favor going after because they're much harder to protect. But if you have newer clients, everybody's on Windows 10, everybody's using the latest version of Office, then you can block legacy authentication and save yourself a whole lot of headache from a security point of view. With Microsoft 365, you also get Intune, which gives you mobile device management, mobile application management. The first one really is for a corporate-owned device where you are happy to lock it down and enroll it. The second one really is for people's own devices. They bring in their iPhone or Android phone and they want to get email on it, and you can do some lightweight policies around that without interfering with the fact that it's their personal device. If you happen to be using System Center Configuration Manager, you can hook that up to Intune using co-management. And then with Windows 10 Enterprise, you get a few more nice security features, including Defender ATP, which is actually a fully fledged endpoint detection and response tool that is doing very well in comparative tests against other EDR solutions today. Let's have a look at the Intune portal. Are you around, Andy? How am I going time-wise? How many minutes have I got left?
Yep, I am here. I think if we can wrap up the content in the next, 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes,
right.
Then we can cover, leave a little time for the Q&A at the end.
Excellent. Yeah, I will definitely be done in 3-4 minutes. So
we can go a minute or two past the hour too, if we have to. But yeah, I'll let you be.
That's okay, thanks. So I just wanted to briefly show you the device management in here. This is where I can enroll devices. I can set up my conditional access policies. I can push out security baselines. These are pretty new, but they're nifty. So I can set up a baseline policy here for different things. Let's just create a new conditional access policy just so you can see it. So I'll give it a name here, test. So I can pick my users and groups that this should apply to. I can pick particular cloud applications. I can set up specific conditions. which device platform are they on, what location are they coming from, is it their particular client app they're trying to access, and if I am going to grant them access, are there any additional security features I want to do. So for this particular application coming from this particular location, I'm going to require multi-factor authentication or other things, right? So these are the policies you can set up here. So that was like 60 seconds of Intune. So let's jump back in here, because I did want to finish off on this slide right here. So this is what you all came for. This is the final slide of my content. So how to choose? Well, obviously Microsoft 365 costs more, and if you have lots of users, it starts adding up very quickly. So a couple of tips here. First of all, if you're a small business, don't default and say, oh, well, we should be using business rather than enterprise. There are some limitations in the business side, and you don't save that much money on a per user basis. So there could definitely be reasons to go to the enterprise SKUs, even if you're a small business. You can mix and match your different SKU levels, right? But you don't want to mix enterprise and business, but for different user categories inside of your business. They are also, so we talked all about the bundled SKUs, but there's actually individual standalone offerings. So if you just want Azure Active Directory Premium P1, you can buy that as a standalone thing for a number of users and add that. But you don't want to end up in too much of a fine-grained thing there, because then you're going to spend more hours actually managing all those little license details rather than just, actually enabling your business to work better. How well governed your company's IT systems is very important. Don't think that Office 365 and Microsoft 365 is going to solve these problems for you. So you want to have an honest look at your company's internal IT before you go to the cloud. And of course, if you do not have a lot of security tools today that match what Microsoft 365 offers, then Microsoft 365 might be a good and cost-effective way of getting your business to a more secure place. And of course, the challenge now is not technical, right? It used to be that we had to really look at all the technical details of things, and that's still around. But the thing now is that once you've moved to the cloud, you need to now help your users adopt to the continuous change and continuous new features and new tools. So that's sort of my little tips there for how you would pick between Office 365 and Microsoft 365. And I think that's it. Yes.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Paul. So I think we'll keep the screen sharing on your end. For the sake of time, I'll skip over our Altaro Office 365 backup demo today. I want to make sure we have enough time to get to the Q&A, because we're getting a lot of great questions in the Q&A here. So definitely keep them coming. Again, if we don't have time to get to them all, we'll do a follow-up blog post with all the questions and their associated answers. The other thing I want to mention, I do know we had a couple of reports of some people having audio issues. Apologies about that. I'm not really sure what caused that for some folks. But just so you know, we are recording today's webinar, and we'll also be supplying a recording of the webinar after the fact. So that way, if you missed a section, you'll be able to watch that and get filled in on the sections that you missed. So with that, we've mentioned this ebook a couple of times during the webinar today. This is a new ebook that we've had made, and it was made by Paul, who's giving our talk today. So he's done a great job on this ebook. A lot of great resources, a lot of great material, and it really, it fills in a lot of the gaps that we didn't have the time to go into in a 1 hour long webinar today. So. Again, it complements this webinar. I think there was a SharePoint migration question earlier in the session. Some resources for SharePoint migration are included in the ebook, and a load of other stuff. So you will be receiving this ebook in an email sometime in the next day. So be on the lookout for that. So you get a direct download link for it, so you can grab the PDF and use it to your heart's content. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I think it's about, yeah, about our forums. So we actually have some forums here at Altaro. If you're interested in joining a upcoming forum community, it's just dojoforums@altaro.com. Right now, you'll see a kind of a generalistic Hyper-V Dojo forum on there, but it's being used for basically all things Microsoft. It's being used for Office 365, Microsoft 365, Azure, Hyper-V. There's a lot of PowerShell discussions happening there. So feel free to check it out if you're interested. I'm active on the forums. A couple of other authors are as well. And I'll have to see if I can't bribe Paul to be involved as well. I haven't talked to him about it yet, but I might be able to supply some fancy pastries or some sort of goodies. I don't know what he likes to be bribed with, but gonna try.
Thanks, Andy.
Yep, not a problem. We'll move on to the next slide. I'm guessing is the demo slide, which, well, nope, not yet. So I wanted to mention our Office 365 backup application. So while I go through this slide, I give Paul a couple of minutes to take a look at the questions that are currently in the Q&A. So again, I mentioned a couple of times here, we have an Office 365 backup application, which is great for those situations where you need more data protection than what Microsoft supplies with Office 365. Microsoft does a great job of providing availability, but there's some things lacking as far as true data protection goes. So that's where a third-party backup application comes into play. So this application can be managed from a single web UI. It protects your mailboxes, contacts, calendars from deletion, malicious users, malware, etc., etc. We also have support for SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business coming on October 3rd, so 2 days from now. And it also includes Azure-based storage that we manage and provide for you, so you don't have to worry about taking care of that yourself. You don't have to provide your own infrastructure at all. And you see some mention of MSPs on here. We have an MSP version of this, and we also have a end user version of this as well. If you're a privately owned company with its own internal IT department, this tool can be used for those situations as well. So with that, I think we're on our Q&A slide. So the next slide will be the demo slide, which we can just skip over. I'm guessing, yep, we can just skip right over that, and we're on our Q&A slide here. So, back up one there, Paul.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, no worries.
Oh, come on.
There we go. All right, so I think we have one poll left. So we'll go ahead and put the poll up really quick, give people a section to provide a little bit more feedback here. What services are you using today if you're using Office 365 or Microsoft 365? If you use any of them that are shown here, go ahead and check the box. If there's one here that, if there's a function that you're really using a lot, there's a service you're using a lot that's not shown here, just go ahead and throw it into the questions form. Like I said, we use these polls to drive content. So if I see a lot of people say, hey, we're using Delve, for example, we'll start putting some Delve related content out on the Altaro blog. So again, if there's one one that you use a lot that's not listed here, just throw it in the questions form. So with that, I want to cover some of the questions, and I don't know if there are any in particular that you really want to address, Paul, that you've seen so far.
Yeah, well, I mean, if people don't mind, we can go a couple of minutes over. I don't mind.
Okay.
So I'm gonna just jump straight in to see what I can answer this one. The 1 terabyte from OneDrive stored the same as Exchange where there's no backup. Well, it's a little bit different in the case of the OneDrive for Business. Again, there is no way of going back and saying, show me exactly what it looked like 6 months ago. However, it is ransomware proof. So there is a feature where you can go back in time, like days or hours, so that if you do get hit with some sort of ransomware that encrypts all your files in your OneDrive for Business on your machine, then synchronizes that back up to the cloud, there is a way of going back to before those files were encrypted, right? So that's pretty good. As far as the second part of that question, I'm going to hand that over to Andy to look at whether your Office 365 backup will also handle OneDrive for Business.
Yes, it will.
It does?
It as of our beta version does. Of course, it's going to be out of beta in 2 days. So in 2 days, it'll be official.
Cool. So recovery data mails, what's the difference between litigation hold and regular backup? So litigation hold is a feature of Exchange Online where you are able to say this particular user or groups of users are under some sort of investigation, and we want them to never be able to delete emails. So even if they delete them out of their folders and then delete them out of the junk folder or the bin in Outlook, they still don't disappear, right? So that's a way from a legal point of view to get back to those. It's not the same as a backup in the sense that you can't go and say easily, show me what this mailbox looked like, 3 months ago, right? That's not so easy to do with that. It does work a little bit like a backup in the sense that nothing ever gets deleted, but it's not exactly the feature for that, right? Public folders, well, modern public folders are now supported in Office 365, and yes, you can migrate public folders from Exchange 2010. What security features does Exchange have over on-prem? So that's a little bit of a generic question, but certainly Exchange Online brings some nice security features that you do not have on premises. The big one that comes to mind is obviously anti-spam and anti-malware, which is not available in Exchange on premises anymore. There was a few versions ago, but they don't even do it anymore. You have to have a third-party tool or a third-party service to filter your emails before they get into your Exchange on-prem. We talked about the GPO question. Yes, the question about Office 365 giving any option to select which applications gets installed on the desktop. So there is a customization tool, right? So if you just allow your users to install from the cloud, just click on the button, they will get Office Pro Plus, the full package. However, if you take away that button, which you can do, and you deploy Office Pro Plus in a managed way from on-premises, there is a customization tool, and it's changed name a few times, and it's now a web-based tool, but either way, it spits out an XML file in the end that allows you to control exactly what gets installed and what's available and which, so you can, have access or not have access, for instance, as you say there, right? Does the Office 365 backup perform backups of public folders in addition to mailboxes? Andy, that's for you too.
Yeah, as far as I know, the built-in tools, again, on the Exchange side are more designed to prevent the data loss. As far as our product goes, public folders directly, we'll do the mailboxes. Public folders, I'm not entirely sure on. I don't believe we do, but I don't want to commit. I don't want to commit to that answer yet. I'll be sure to include that in the follow-up Q&A blog post for those that are interested.
Excellent, thanks. We had a couple more questions pop in here. We have an Exchange Online handle backup, similar to what we talked about before. Yes, they will protect your data and they will never lose it. So they do backup in that sense, right? You don't need to worry about an Exchange server crashing and you losing your data in the cloud, but they don't do the can you go back 3 weeks in time. Could security application I'm not sure exactly the question, but it sounds like, could you add a security application on top of Office 365? Danu is asking, and I think if the question is, could you pick individual security features from some of the other Microsoft solutions, you could definitely pick those individually. And could you use a third-party tool? Well, there certainly are some third-party tools that add security on top of Office 365. And Chris is pointing out that you can still use group policy to manage Office Pro Plus, which is totally true. Oh, the character limit SharePoint Online has as well. Yeah, there is some limitations, and I actually have a link to this in the book that talks exactly about all those limitations on path depth and those sorts of things. So thanks for that, Jack. The link to that document is in the book. Okay, that looks like all the questions, unless something else is going to pop in.
Yeah, I think that covers most of them. I know there were a few further up that we haven't had time to get to, but we'll be sure to include that in the follow-up blog post, those questions and their associated answers. So for the sake of time, I want to be respectful of everyone's time to let them get back to their days. And Paul, I want to thank you for stopping by and presenting all this great content. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Andy. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate it. So with that, yeah, we'll let everybody go for the day. Thanks for attending today's webinar. We're always glad to have you here and present great content to you guys, so appreciate it. And we hope to see you again for another Altaro webinar in the future. And with that, I will log off and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.